Alright, so welcome to the morning. Today's video we are obviously talking about the iPhone 16 Pro Max from the perspective of someone who had an iPhone 13 Pro, for some of you guys that really wanted to know what phone I was using in the last video, but also as someone who doesn't necessarily use their phone to create content with. I kind of missed the boat of having ProRes or even having Apple Log as well and high megapixel cameras, but today I did an unboxing of my brand new phone and I want to go through some of my first impressions, what I want to use it for, and also to lightly test out some things and leave the door open for other stuff later on. Now, coming right out of the box, this is actually a pretty nicely sized phone. I have gigantic hands and most things look really small in my hand, but that 6.9 inch screen actually is kind of nice and welcome. Although sometimes I have to move my thumb all the way to the diagonal of the screen, which is a little bit farther from my palm, it actually is a perfect size for me. As well as I'm going to use this as a filmmaking tool, this is a bright enough monitor that I can connect it to my camera in order to do that. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, in terms of color, I got the natural titanium. I didn't get the desert one or whatever one looked kind of like the rose gold, mostly because this was the only one that was available that I'd get in time for me to start making content. I also got my phone through my carrier, so I only got to get the 512. I couldn't get the 1 terabyte, but I'm going to treat this phone a little bit as a new phone. None of my other content on my other phone is actually going to go on here, so that leaves a lot of room for that ProRes Apple Log stuff. Now, I have no idea if it's going to rain today. It was actually sunny like an hour ago, but I'm going to go out, test this phone out in terms of its video quality and some of the new audio features as well, and kind of give my thoughts on those too. Most ideal time of day to test out this phone, but we are working with the Apple Log on the 16 Pro Max. It looks exceptionally good. I'm coming from a phone that didn't have Apple Log on it, and having a log curve with that dynamic range and also the color looks really good for a phone is actually really nice, especially when you want to get content on the fly. Now, in terms of exposing for Apple Log, I'm actually just using the zebras and the exposure dial that's on the Blackmagic app, which is an app that I'm pretty much only going to use when I'm getting iPhone Apple Log footage. For everything else, it might just be something where I'll throw away a little bit later, but that Blackmagic camera app is actually really nice, especially to give you menu controls that you would have on a Blackmagic camera, except it's on your iPhone. Okay, so this is what I mean by exposing for Apple Log. So right now I'm using the Blackmagic app. I'm not even going to use the native camera app because I like this one a lot better. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this plus minus button right over here, and right now I'm plus 2.6, and all that stuff on the screen right now, those are zebras, so I won't be able to get that information back. What I can do though is I can move that exposure compensation down a bit, and what it'll do is it will change my shutter speed, which you'll see over here, but those zebra lines start to go away. Now with an ND filter, this is a lot easier, but this is a great way to actually expose properly for log, especially because the rules of your mirrorless camera aren't exactly the same, and I just find this way a little bit easier until I can figure things out. Now I'm going to take a quick pause right here so I can show you guys how I graded a lot of the clips using the Apple Log on DaVinci Resolve. Now there's a couple things you have to keep in consideration, but there is one really important thing that you need to know, and I'm going to show you that through the color space transform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of this because I just finished this grade, and I'm just going to press Alt D. Oh, that's not the right place. But I'm going to press Alt D. Now this turns everything off and you could only see the Apple Log that's going to be there. It's going to be flat and desaturated, normally how you would see other log footage. Now what I'm going to go here is my color space transform. You could find this in DaVinci Resolve, and it's one of the most powerful tools that you can use. Essentially what it does is it takes a color space that's native to the thing you captured the image on, and you can change it to anything you want. Now for this example, I'm working on a LUT based off of one of the film looks in DaVinci Resolve, making a ton of adjustments that I'll probably have up a little bit later. But the way that this starts is I'm actually going to use Rec 2020. This is incredibly important. Most people will use Rec 709 in other cameras, and that actually makes sense sometimes. But using Rec 2020 on the Apple phones, that is what's going to be the native input color space using the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Now, what's nice about DaVinci Resolve is you could actually get into Apple Log as one of the log gammas. Some gammas don't actually work. For example, the Osmo Pocket doesn't have D-Log M in DaVinci Resolve just yet, but you have Apple Log. So that way DaVinci Resolve actually knows the dynamic range that you're working with because it's native to your phone. Now, for film looks, you're actually going to use the Rec 709 and Cineon Film Log. No matter what your input color space is going to be here, you're probably going to have this being like S-Log or C-Log, whatever camera you're using. But if you are going to use some of the film looks built in DaVinci Resolve, Rec 709 and Cineon Film Log is usually where you're going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this one on, and that's what it's going to look like. The log curve changed a little bit, but once we've added in our film look, that's how we're going to be looking. Now, what I'm going to do is things are going to go something called under the hood, and that's going to go anything from our color space transform to any of the numbers that are before that color space transform. So there's a couple of adjustments that I'm going to make here. Now, this one was just like a safety. I'll turn this one back on. This was actually to change the color of the sky. I wanted to get a little bit more teal in there, but I didn't want it to be overbearing. So I went over into my color warper over here. You can see right there, that's actually where this point is. And I can move that back and forth however I want. And you notice that it's not going to be that crazy. The reason why is because I went over to my keyer over here and I actually took this down from 100%, where that might be a little bit too much for me, and I brought it back down to like 74. So that way there is going to be a little bit more teal into the sky, but it's not super overbearing. That's just how I do it. There's tons of ways you can do this. Now we're going to go over here. I'm going to turn this guy on. Now what you're going to notice over here is my offset. So if I was to do this, turn it back on and go back to its regular brightness, I just brought the overall exposure down just to make sure that I'm getting these deeper blacks into here, because I do have a nice bright and colorful sky. Then I'm going to go over to here. That is going to add in a little bit of that saturation. I do find that the Apple Log is very, very flat and desaturated, but I brought a little bit of it back. Now, on the HDR tab here, this is where I can really get into some of the values inside of this Apple Log. There's a lot of dynamic range in Apple Log. So what I do is I'm going to my HDR tab, and I can adjust things like how much shadow is in here, which basically brings up and down my shadows. I bring these guys a little bit up. I like using the HDR because it gives you a lot of like granular control. So if there's parts in the darks, it'll give you a little mask if I hover over here and click on it, and it'll actually show that as well in your darks, your shadows, your light, your highlight, and other things like that. HDR takes a little bit more time, but if you're working with something that has a lot of dynamic range, like a log profile, this actually goes a long way. Going back into here, did another color picker, just really desaturated that sky over here just to make sure it doesn't look completely unnatural. So you can see that after and before. And then brightened up everything else a little bit. This does sound like it doesn't make that much sense, but I did take that gain, that kind of higher end, brought that up a little bit, and that's the image that we have. Now, I always do this is I add a little bit of glow into here. Now, something I do that's a little bit different that you might have seen before is I change my blend mode to soft light. Now, this by default is going to be something else. I'll put it into soft light. So for example, if I want to put it into normal, it does look a little bit hazy and a little bit dull. I'll go into soft light. That way, it does still have a little bit of that halation effect, but what I'll do is I'll change my blend, put it down to 50% instead of 100, because that's at 50, that's at 100. And it's a little bit too much for me. So I usually pull this back just a little bit, and that gives me the look that I'm going for. And then I just put in some film grain. I'll enable that, and I'm sure you guys know what film grain does. So this is actually how I grade some of these Apple Log clips. I'm going to try to put together a lot of the adjustments. I'm still working on it using that Kodak film as a base, and maybe there'll be a LUT pack out soon. I just have to make a lot more adjustments because there is quite a few steps on here, and I want to make sure it works on every single clip. But back to the video. Oh, also, might not mention that the film look I'm using is going to be Kodak 2383D60. That's going to already be built in DaVinci Resolve. Just got to go to your LUTs. It's over here. You could use that as a base, but clearly there's a bunch of tweaks that were made. Now, this is such a small thing that I like about the 16 Pro Max, and I didn't mention this in the unboxing part of things, but it's actually going to be the new USB-C cable. Now, this is kind of that rubbery, kind of plasticky one that you got with the 13 Pro, which frayed, it fell apart over time, and when you left it plugged in for too long, it started to get a bit hot, and the little edges, like right on the end, they would start to burn off a little bit. These guys feel a bit more of a higher quality. They feel like they're braided. They actually are braided, which is super nice because I feel like this is going to be a little bit more flexible and able to move around a bit more. However, I have like 700 USB-C to USB-C cables, and they're all used for charging. In fact, I have CarPlay on here too, so I could charge my phone at the same time. But now I could do away with the old lightning cables, and I can move on to these guys. Let this be known that absolutely nobody has a pretty face on the front-facing camera of an iPhone. But one thing I want to actually have you take in is how good does the audio sound? Now, Apple actually did a lot of improvements to the audio coming out of the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro Max, and Patrick Tomasso did a great video, which I'll leave in the comments down below. But one of the things I really like about capturing content on the fly is to make sure that my audio is good. You can forgive bad image quality or iPhone quality, but if your audio is crap, well, then everything kind of falls apart. Having an enhanced audio inside of the phone internally means I don't have to use things like my DJI mics. Instead, I could just use my phone in order to create content. But let me know in the comments down below, how does the audio sound? Because right now, I'm just recording on my phone. So this is what happens when you drive out an hour and a half to finish up a video and you realize that you still have toothpaste on your face during that clip. So I'm gonna reshoot this right here. Now, one thing I haven't talked about this entire video, and it's one of the main draws on the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max, is going to be that brand new camera control button. Now, this thing on the side, I haven't figured out too much yet, but it gives you the ability to control some of the lenses. You could also access the camera a lot quicker, and as well as just stop and start record, or if you want to take a photo. Now, this kind of has a little bit more filmmaking and photography in mind because it kind of sets up the same way you would a camera with a shutter button, and this is going to be a little bit more handy, especially when I don't want to miss a moment while I'm filming on the fly. Currently, the camera control button does not work on the Blackmagic app, so I do have to use a native camera app, and you can still use Apple Log on there as well. I just prefer to use a Blackmagic app, but hopefully Apple actually ends up implementing that button into the Blackmagic app to make things a little bit easier. Overall, I think where the iPhone 16 is going to fit into my workflow is A, going to be a BTS camera, B, is going to be a camera where I need to get content on the fly, especially with how good that audio sounds coming right out of the phone, and C, there are a bunch of filmmaking apps that I use in order to make my life a little bit easier on production. Now, I don't think currently where we are with the iPhones that you could actually replace a camera. I don't think that's actually a good conversation to have right now because there are so many things my Lumix S9 does, which isn't the most top of the end camera, that could still do better than an iPhone. Now, that being said, I'm going to kind of wrap this up here. I'm trying to get this video out in the next 45 minutes, but if you guys do want to see a couple more LUTs on the Apple Log, I'm still working on it, I'm still trying to figure out some tweaks, leave a comment down below, and maybe I'll make a follow-up video, especially using the iPhone as a filmmaking tool. That being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.